Gentlemen, good morning.
Good morning, Dwight.
To kick things off, why don't you each of us just do a quick round robin and tell us a little bit more about who you are and what your role is in your organization and where partnerships fit into that.
Of course, absolutely.
Start us off, Dan.
Thanks, Dwight. Yeah, so Dan Christian, the head of Travel Corporation, the world's largest travel company that most of you have probably never heard of. There's about 30 different brands in the group. Most of them are tour operators, river cruise lines, hotels. So I share a few things in common with you gentlemen, just no airlines. And there are day tour operators, if you're familiar with, like Evan Evans here in the UK. So I head up digital for all of those brands, which means websites, social media, digital marketing, and are responsible for a lot of the partnerships that we have in the group, which is another reason I wanted to be here and be a part of this session.
So good morning, everyone. My name is Nicola. I'm working for NH Hotel Group. For those ones who don't know, NH Hotel Group is a hotel chain with almost 400 properties. Most of them are in Europe, and we have a relevant presence also in Latin America. I'm in charge for business development, which it means in our company B2B sales. So I will talk about those partnerships related to B2B sales, not really, let's say, technological one or, let's say, distribution ones.
Good morning, everyone. Antony Price from BMI. First of all, I'll explain what BMI is. We are a small boutique airline based here in the UK, but we fly UK domestic and inter-European flights. But we're very much a business-focused airline. We fly small Embraer 145 jets that fly about 2 hours, and we actually do quite a bit of flying within Germany domestically as well, and have a big base in Munich. But my role basically looks after a pretty broad remit from distribution agreements, online sales, through to the whole end-to-end customer proposition. So one day I can be talking to catering suppliers about the spec that we serve on board the aircraft. The next day I can be bringing in a new online sales platform and internet booking engine. And then all the, obviously, brand and customer engagement pieces in the middle. So it's been quite an interesting change going from working from a couple of very large national global carriers to working for a boutique airline. But happy to share with you some insights about how a small boutique airline looks at partnerships in a range of areas and how that's kind of crucial to our success.
And the 145 is one of the few aircraft where you can get a window seat and an aisle seat at the same time.
There's no middle seats. It's awesome. You've got a single seat on its own, or you've got two seats together.
That's
so
right.
It's a great experience.
So, ladies and gentlemen, just a reminder that if you have any questions, feel free to go to slido.com and enter in EFT Europe as the meeting code. Those questions will appear here. I also believe that we have microphones in the audience. If you want to raise your hand and ask it the old-fashioned way, please do so. We really want to encourage your participation to ask this distinguished panel your questions. So Dan, you guys represent a wide range of brands, right? When you talk about partnerships, how much of that is intra-company versus external? I mean, how does that fit in? When you go about looking for partners, what drives that?
Sure, no, great question. I think for all of us here in the room, I mean, given that partnerships is a key driver for us being here, the opportunity for us really kind of fits into three areas. We've got distribution partners, of course, which is incredibly important to our growth. And we're seeing substantial growth in online sales. So those distribution partners are important to our continued success. And then we've got technology partners, another reason for being here, because there's actually, when we were at the San Francisco conference, we had Postbeyond join us. We've had Stackla join us, two of our technology partners that we've had in the group. And then we've got marketing partners. And so those are kind of the three areas when we look at and why we would otherwise work with other companies that make sense. Marketing partnerships. And Jean-Michel was here yesterday on stage with Susie from Red Carnation Hotels as part of our group. And he was talking about the experience economy and focusing on people actually doing home dining experiences. And he's a big partner of ours. And it's a great marketing product partnership where we had a gap and there was a great competitive advantage by partnering with him. So those are kind of three areas, but there's certainly no shortage of opportunities. I think most of our businesses today are transforming into much more platforms where we work with partners in new and interesting ways.
So Antony is a boutique airline. It's different, isn't it? I mean, you're focused in other areas. So what are the types of things what drive your partnerships?
Yeah, I mean, being a small boutique airline, we're only 400 people in total. So we specialize and focus on the things that we can deliver really well. We don't try and do everything like a big global carrier with. We look to catering suppliers as a core partner because they're delivering that customer experience for us. We look at our airports as real key partners for us because our network's very different to big global carriers. We fly to secondary cities typically, and they've got to be bought into our business strategy and very much aligned with the type of service that we're providing. But about 80% of our traffic is business or corporate travel, so that's the type of airport destinations we typically look to serve. So the way that we work really closely in partnership with those airports to often develop new routes where they don't currently have service is a really important part of our kind of business development focus. But like Dan, we have obviously key distribution partners, we have key marketing partners, we have key service delivery providers from an operational perspective. And we just couldn't be successful without all of those working really closely in partnership.
But not to paraphrase, but it sounds like you're probably heavier on the distribution side, right?
Yeah.
And so it's kind of funny you guys sat down this way because we've got Dan, all of the above, and more distribution. Where do you fit into the mix? Maybe somewhere in the middle?
Well, yeah, I would say something different because in the end, I'm mostly focused on those kind of partnership let's say, related to direct business, which it means the kind of partnerships that we cover are related to TMC, airlines, corporations, and our sales philosophy is to have in place this kind of partnership to have the pillars of our sales strategy. So in the end, we try to get this partnership in which, of course, we have a win-win situation, trying to have long-term partnerships. We are not interested in having just agreements or having just, let's say, a relationship with some of our clients. We want to have something stronger. And from this point of view, a partnership is the perfect environment to have a long-term relationship and very good direct business from some of those players who really want to have something special with you.
So when can it go bad? I mean, partnership is one of those words. It's kind of like love. We all talk about it. We all think it's a great thing. But there must be moments or times or situations where it just hasn't worked out.
Yeah.
So what are some examples of when it hasn't worked out, and what have you guys done?
Yeah, well, it's interesting you bring that up because I think one of the things that when I first joined, partners, one of the other members of the team who's no longer there, described partnerships as, you need to get divorced before you get married. And in terms of putting a partnership deal in place. And I can tell you that didn't work very well, right? Because most people don't want to go through that experience at the beginning. Right. And I understand from a legal point of view why that's beneficial. You want to get that all out of the way.
Right.
But it destroys the opportunity to run down the aisle together, right? And so I think one of the things that we shifted to was finding a way to land and expand, to get a relationship established, and whether you want to call it a proof of concept or trial something together, find a way where there's mutual interest to try and make something work. And that's been our focus, and I think it's actually proven to be quite successful for us because you don't necessarily know how it's going to play out. But if you discover a partner that you have, that you trust and have a great relationship with, I mean, after Jean Michel's session yesterday, he and I had dinner last night. There was a dinner function. He and I sat across from each other, and we talked for an hour and a half, 2 hours. And that's because we've got a great partnership, a great relationship. And I think that's ultimately how some of these will flourish. So yes, of course, there has to be a core business problem, a solution. You have to be, both sides have to see real benefit. But ultimately, there's also a relationship there. And so I think that, back to the way the question started, I think it's a gradual process. And rather than trying to immediately bring in the lawyers and try to do something that is much more complex and causes everyone a lot of heartache right at the beginning, you need to find a way to get a relationship established. on the right footing.
It reminds me of the line from, I think it was Robin Williams, who said about marriage, I might as well just find someone I don't like and give them a house, right? So I think starting with the divorce analogy is just, but do you guys have a template for that? Do you have a certain roadmap that you follow, or is every single partnership situation different and you take it on a case-by-case basis? Or do you have certain things that you look to and kind of check or tick the boxes, as they say here in the UK?
Yeah, no, it's great. I mean, so the travel corporation, the fact that corporation is in our name would otherwise seem to indicate that we are large corporate, and even the size of our group and the number of brands. But the intention of the structure is there's no committees, everything is very entrepreneurial, and it's a family-owned business, so things move very quickly. And to that extent, we are very flexible. Yeah, we have in-house counsel, we have MSAs, we have NDAs, but it's rare that we need to start there. And if anything, trying to just establish a good working relationship, we'll work with our partners contract initially. Really, and they're all at different stages, especially when you're trying to work with smaller organizations. There's no more way to stifle innovation than to make it far more complex in the beginning when you've got a startup of a few people, and there's one of them that's here that we're working with, and they're just trying to find their way. And so we've worked successfully with a lot of startups when they were 3 or 4 people around a table in a small office in an incubator that are now on Series B funding. And we get grandfathered pricing, which is also a nice advantage of that relationship once they scale. And so we have got a great relationship, and we actually have become experts on their platform. So, but I think the key for us is to make sure that we find a way. I don't know, you know the Bill Gates story about how Bill Gates got the deal with IBM in the first place.
Right.
Is because he just signed off on the paperwork and didn't have lawyers review it. And so I think there's an element to say that expediency, especially in our current environment, is most important.
How about you, Antony? Do you guys date before you get married?
Yeah, using that analogy, I mean, business partnerships are very much like marriages or breaking up with a girlfriend or boyfriend. You know, you go into it with the best of intentions. You hope that there's going to be this long-term partnership where you've got aligned goals. But that isn't always the case. And the ones that we found from BMI is where you've got actually a prenup in place, a contract that is pretty clear and concise, but short, that's great. We've got some partners that have got ridiculously long contracts or prenups as we look at them. And as our business has evolved, as the distribution environment has evolved, some of those legacy contracts that are really weighty have been quite difficult for us to navigate our way through. So it's been really interesting. I mean, at the end of the day, you go into it with the kind of spirit and intention of what you want to do together. And I think it's been quite frustrating as a really small carrier when you're working in a really large distribution environment that you've got some of these legacy contracts that have been so restrictive. So that's one of the interesting challenges that we've been going through. And it does feel like a pretty bitter divorce rather than an amicable parting of ways, which is the way you prefer to break up any relationship.
Do you guys approach it the same way at NH, or I mean, is it?
Yeah, let's say that we are quite focused on KPIs. What I mean is, of course, each part wants to set the objectives at the beginning of a partnership. So it is important to define on a periodic way an assessment on what is going on. So for instance, if we have built a partnership to increase US sales, and then we are seeing that sales are just increasing with that partner in the Spanish market where we have fantastic brand awareness, it means that the partnership is not working. So we have to sit again with the partner and adjust what is going on. Otherwise, we have to stop that kind of partnership. Or let's say, different story is when you start a partnership that is working very well, and then something happens in the market.
Right.
So for instance, with the airlines, it happens from time to time that you are able to, in this case, I mean airlines as...
But not with BMI, right?
No, of course,
Okay,
not with the BMI.
Sure.
But I mean those kind of service that we as another chain provide to an airlines for their crew. So we accommodate their crews. And at a certain point in time, providing to an airlines a certain price on a certain destination could be perfect, but after 2 or 3 years, the situation has changed because for instance, the market is growing, so we don't need that kind of airlines anymore at that price. So we have to sit with our partners and we have to discuss. And I think this is something very important with someone that you consider your partner, you can have an open discussion on things. It is not just black or white.
So, Dan, do you have situations, you've got I know you said the word corporation conveys this really behemoth, but do you have situations where you might have companies in your portfolio that are working with partners who are competitors to other companies? I mean, or do you have a corporate strategy or guideline that says you have to find it in-house first? How does that work? Because I want to try to delve a little bit deeper into this idea that partners can become competitors. And we use the marriage analogy. So what do you do when your spouse isn't faithful, right? To get back to that, it's a little early, but okay.
So a few people aren't here this morning.
Right.
I think
that's what's going on, right? We know who's two-timing. But I mean, partners can be competitors, right? You were just talking very well, Nicola, that the relationship can wear out, and then you're stuck with this, with a contract that isn't serving your business anymore. So what do you guys do to prevent that, and what do you do to make sure that when you have a portfolio of companies that you don't have people partnering with competitors of other companies?
Yeah, of course. No, it's an excellent question, because it is really important once a partnership starts to scale. So, being TTC and lean and entrepreneurial, trying to get partnerships in place with each of our brands and allow them to be street fighters to a certain extent, to be competitive and make sure that they can do what's in their best interest to be able to compete in their niche. There's always been a certain amount of flexibility and leeway that we've had to make sure that we're making the right decisions on behalf of each business unit. That being said, once you actually start to really scale a relationship, exclusivity obviously is important, especially if you're trying to develop a competitive advantage across multiple brands in your vertical. And so that there are, the best way to describe it would be putting in an existing relationship in place, that there be a sunset clause. So proof of concept, 6 months, let's give it a trial, let's find out. So we're both really excited about this. And then that way, if it doesn't work out, to your earlier question, you gave it a shot. You both gave it best efforts, and you came in with the right intentions, and it didn't materialize the way either of you expected, and therefore everything's left well, and so you move forward. And but in most cases, things do work out, and then it becomes a case of, okay, so based on that, we both see the potential. Let's put something more formal in place so we can scale, and then we can actually, it's in their best interest to look at multi-brand opportunities, and then we can establish what the right rules of engagement are going to be, and we're already then coming from a place where we have some confidence, trust established to be able to put something in place that will serve both businesses longer term.
Right. That's smart. So the sunset clause is a great idea. Do you guys do that at BMI?
No, there's actually a really interesting example last week in the aviation space that I think it's worth touching on, and that's where you've got kind of strong partnerships that are breaking up, and then new partnerships being formed where they were previously really fierce competitors. And the example I'm using is a previous company I've worked for, Air New Zealand. They had a very strong partnership with Virgin Australia. That was in place for a number of years, delivering some really good South Pacific results across the Tasman between Australia and New Zealand. That partnership kind of dissipated, but Air New Zealand's done something really interesting in terms of working with their most fierce competitor, Qantas, to do a domestic codeshare deal. Now, you could never have imagined that happening a couple of years ago because the rivalry's always been so fierce. But the breakdown of the other relationship has opened an opportunity for them. So they're going to compete fiercely still for long-haul traffic, especially from the Americas. But they're going to work collaboratively on the domestic codeshare piece. So it's really interesting how you see prior relationships that were kind of very competitive that have been evolved into something actually is a win-win for both parties, but still enables them to compete quite fiercely on different market segments.
But in that case, it was for Air New Zealand. I mean, what percentage of their revenue, or how much of their demand was there for internal Australia? I mean,
quite a considerable amount. Yeah, because a big part of their traffic is visitors coming down from, say, North America.
Right.
And most North American travelers will want to do an Australian and New Zealand combined trip.
Right.
So when they do that, there's definitely the opportunity for domestic travel. Plus, Qantas has got a huge domestic network.
Right.
Air New Zealand flying even New Zealanders into Australia can only get them to the key ports, and they really needed that domestic network.
Is there regulation that prevents them, I mean, if they wanted to, from flying domestically in Australia the way there is?
No, they could, and that's the thing. Qantas has been flying domestically in New Zealand, and they've been fiercely competitive in the New Zealand domestic market. But that competition dynamic's going to change now because they're actually working in codeshare partnership. So yeah, they've got their own Jetstar brand on the ground in New Zealand, flying domestic routes. So really interesting change.
So Nicola, do you guys ever partner with competitors? Do you ever find hotels in markets that you don't want to do direct investment in, that you compete in other markets that you might do something with? I don't know if that's logical.
Well, recently, but I have not still, let's say, that information, that level of information. In each of the group signed an agreement, a partnership with AHAM Resorts. So let's say a large group of resorts basically in the Caribbean.
Right.
So it is a way, let's say, to put synergies together and develop something good. But I think that apart from these cases that are, let's say, really strategic kind of partnership for the companies, there is something smaller that we can do on our side. I make this example. I mean, in the hotel industry, the competition is huge. It is really a very challenging environment from this point of view. But according to the objective, it is possible to build something with your competitors. So, for instance, we have some properties with a large conference rooms, for instance, 500 seats, but we have the property with only 200 or 300 rooms. So in order, let's say, to host a big conference of 500 rooms, we have to make deal with our competitors so that all together we can bring that kind of business. Otherwise, we would be not able to take by ourselves, and of course, our competitors can take any advantage from that. So it is possible, let's say, to build something smart, but it is important to understand what you want to get, and if the people that is in front of you has the same will to build something useful together with you.
Okay. Any questions from the audience? Don't forget we have Slido.com. We're happy to entertain your questions. Dan, if I'm a small, scrappy startup with really cool technology and I'm sitting in the audience and I want to partner with one of the TTC brands, what advice, recommendations, what tips would you give me to get, to knock on the door and get that door opened?
Yeah. So I think the one thing that everyone should please keep in mind is that my door can be opened, and most of our other team members, we encourage the same thing. So I take calls all the time, and I take the opportunity not only to look at new startups and figure out if there might be a fit within the group. So I'm always making time for that because I think it's incredibly important. And then I'm always kind of further investing in those relationships, as you know, Dwight, from previous i4 Travels, to make sure that we continue to nurture those relationships and give back to those startups. Because I think one of the things that we don't want to do, and this is another one of those, it's kind of a culture change, is that you can't take a partner and make it your best kept secret. That's not good for you or for them. And so I think there's a tendency to do that, because if you find a great solution, you don't want your competitors, you don't want anyone else to know that you've all of a sudden got something. But that doesn't do them any great benefit, maybe in the short term. But if you've developed a really great partnership, and so there's, to your question about the number of people in the room, depending on, it's really figuring out where best it is to fit in the organization. So the one thing I would just ask you guys to keep in mind is if you look at the Travel Corporation, ttc.com, look at all of our brands in the group, and the first thing I'm going to ask you is, where do you see a fit in the business today? And I realize it's hard from the outside looking in at a matrix organization that was 30 different business units, but at least be able to have an understanding of where you see there might be an opportunity. And I think that's the best starting point. But it's important to know that even attending these events and being a part of this community, there is a big focus for us for speed and transformation, and that really comes from not always developing your own tech, finding the right partners that have solved a specific niche. And one of the best examples is we wanted to harness the power of user-generated content across all of our brand websites. We know that people have a great experience on our tours, on our trips, and they're going to tell their family and friends about it. So how do we amplify that to build up more repeat business and more direct business? And one of the ways is showcasing people's experiences on our coaches, and so actually sharing their images. So we were actually going to develop it ourselves, and just at the time, a few years ago, a couple of startups were developing social aggregators. And all of a sudden that was kind of a new development, is that you could harness user-generated content, you could create widgets, you could make it available on your website. And we decided to partner with a company called Stackla that was based in Sydney. It was a small little startup at the time. And now they're on Series B in San Francisco. And it's a perfect example of we were trying to solve a problem. We had a partner that knocked on our door at the same time, and we said, wait a second, you've already developed something that's going to take us 6 to 12 months to build, and we don't know what we could build is as good as what you have to offer today. Right. And so let's get that going. And it's been incredibly successful for us and for them. So I think that's where, please, by all means, feel free to send me a note or make some suggestions.
So the tips are, don't be intimidated. The door is open. Yeah. Do your homework and have something interesting to offer, right? That's going to solve a business problem.
Well said. Yeah. That's the magic 3.
So there's a question from the audience. Can you name some of the startups you're working with and why? Stackla was one. Any others that you're comfortable telling us about?
Yeah, of course. No, absolutely. I think that's important. So Postbeyond just happens to be Toronto-based, which is where I am, even though my team and the business is global. My team's in LA and Cape Town and Sydney, and this is where it can come from anywhere. So the example with Postbeyond is that we were looking to get all of our travel directors active on social media. We wanted to encourage most of our sales managers, executives. Everyone talked about social media for a few years there, and it couldn't be more important today. If anyone have read Mary Meeker's latest Internet Trends report, and you look at social businesses that are now, it's gone from 3% to 6% of e-commerce sales. There's 6 businesses that have scaled to $100 million just selling on social platforms. So the point is, it's very real, right? That people are seeing social content and they're going and making purchases. And so Postbeyond offered us an opportunity to give all of our team members a tool that they could easily log into and know with one click social content that they could share. And again, this was something that we wouldn't have built ourselves. And they were 3 or 4 people in a incubator. And now they're about a 40-person, no longer really kind of moved out of that startup realm. But they're another great example where and their model worked perfectly. It's kind of a SaaS model. So there's 2 hopefully beneficial examples, and I'll say one more because they're no longer in startup phase because they're based here in the UK, down near where I was actually born, near Portsmouth. They're in a company called FIFO. Does everyone know FIFO? Right? Andy Mabbitt. And when I met Andy about 5 years, he was just getting this business underway. And we needed user-generated reviews. And everyone's like, what's a FIFO? Do people care about FIFO? All that mattered is that they were independent reviews of people who had actually been on our trips versus a TripAdvisor review where you can't say for sure, right? And so FIFO was starting to be used by, eventually it's Expedia.co.uk. It's also now global. And FIFO has scaled dramatically, but they're based on a farm. And I've been down there and I've driven the tractor with Andy, and I was just like, I
didn't know that.
Yeah, it's an incredible startup story out of the UK. They've got a Boston office, and they're branching out into the US. And so it's neat to have been on that journey with them and have a great relationship with FIFO. And so I think that's where we put an emphasis on working with startups versus some of the larger established players.
So you've mentioned a lot in the area of user-generated content, digital. Is that really a focus? I mean, you're the chief digital officer, so I would imagine that's where it's at, right? That's what you're looking for in terms of partners today, that continue to be an area of need.
But the key thing there, Dwight, is just in terms of consumer demand. So the focus, of course, is business and growth and KPIs and performance. And we're a very profitable business because ultimately it's not investment for the sake of we're chasing something. It's really about how do we make sure that our brands are relevant where customers are spending their time. So it's how do we intercept them, and that's the core focus. So it's a profit-driven motive from the beginning, not that we're chasing what we think is the next thing, is that we actually see that consumer behavior is changing and we're otherwise going to be left out if we're not relevant where they're spending their time. So I think the big focus of this is for us is looking at where they're spending their time and then figuring out what tools and technology we need to make sure that we remain relevant.
And is that the same at NH?
Well, the perspective is different, let's say, at least from my side, because I'm not, let's say, in the same environment.
Right.
Those kind of partnership that are managed by my team, so let's say into the B2B sales, I have to say are not that much related to to newcomers into the market, because in that case it's much more complicated to understand which is the potential behind. So in most of the cases we are mostly focused on, let's say, big players. But this doesn't mean that we are not listening to anyone. I mean, so we are open to discuss everything in order to understand. In the end, understanding is the most important for us.
Right.
But of course, in terms of priority, it's easier to focus on big partners or partners that can have a big potential behind instead than focusing on those partners that you have to evaluate.
Right, and that's kind of the differences between your roles,
Yeah.
right? Dan's on the digital side, you're on the sales and development side, more focused on putting what we say heads in beds in the
Yeah.
US. A little crass.
Exactly.
But, Antony, we have did you want to comment on that? Go ahead. Yeah.
We're a really small boutique airline, so for us, working with smaller startups is perfect because we find them to be much more nimble and flexible and
Right.
able to adapt the way they work in terms of thinking about our business model. But the one thing I'll say for the people in the room that are looking to pitch those sort of companies are, we get approached every day by so many different creative agencies, marketing agencies,
Right.
technology companies, all sorts of different potential partnerships. And a lot of them just haven't done any groundwork or research. They're just saying, hey, here I am. You should speak to me because I'm really cool.
Right.
And that's great. But because there's so many of them, we haven't got the time to sit there and sift through all of them and evaluate them fully. It makes much more of an impact if the person's actually done a bit of prep work, actually looked at your business, looked at your website, knows what you're about, and how they can actually add some value. And then they articulate that in a really short summary that is impactful and punchy, because that's much more likely to open the door and get a conversation that we're willing to engage in. Me and my team get a huge number of LinkedIn requests every day with people pitching different ideas because they know that we're open to these sorts of ideas because we're small and nimble.
Yeah.
But it's just making your pitch impactful and tailoring it to the business that you're looking to work with.
Yeah, I mean, that's such common sense, and yet it's not that common, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm an independent consultant, and I get people all the time asking what my team and I are doing about X, Y, or Z, and I'm like,
I think the best
let me ask myself, right?
Yeah. I think the best example is actually someone once sent us this really cool lightsaber. And we thought, wait a minute, why have we got this lightsaber being delivered to us? But the company had gone away and thought about our brand, thought about our challenges, and then put together this great narrative that was really brought to life through this kind of gift that they delivered. And it was awesome. It had exactly the right sort of tone and impact to make us pick the phone up and say, guys, you've done a great job of thinking about who we are. And that opened the door to start actually a really productive partnership.
And it's actually refreshing, even if it's not a lightsaber, it's just a well-written email. They get, because it's solving a problem for me versus one more damn email I have to ignore or write back to, or one more LinkedIn request I have to say no thank you to. So that's smart. But there's a question from the audience for you, Antony, which is, can you please explain what sorts of problems you run into with your legacy contracts? What are some of the limitations that impact your business? And we might ask Nicola and Dan to answer that as well, but since it was directed to you.
Sure.
And I wonder if there's some insider information going on. Is this from an airline?
Definitely.
And I'm just going ahead. Or a hotel?
I guess probably the easiest example to talk about there are our distribution agreements. We've got some very old legacy distribution agreements that were signed 5 years ago. And these are 10-year agreements that are quite rigid and fixed. And some of our GDS partners have been really good and evolved the way they work with us, and some have been less quick to grasp the change in technology and opportunity. And the trouble is the industry is just changing so quickly that what was relevant 5 years ago isn't relevant now and is going to be even less relevant in 5 years' time. And being as small and nimble as we are, we recognize that we could do a much better job if we had more flexibility and control to manage our distribution setup in a different way to we do now. Now, just to give you an example, we're only about 20% direct online business and 80% still coming through our TMC partners, which is a low percentage for the airline world. Part of that is because we are very business focused and we're dealing with a lot of TMCs and corporations that have large volumes of traffic on it. But also part of it is some of the limitations that we've had from these legacy distribution agreements that we found it really hard to amend and navigate our way through. So yeah, we're stuck in the middle of some quite difficult negotiations at the moment in terms of how we chart a better path through that gives us more flexibility about the way that we distribute our own product into the market. And it's interesting, we're not we're not a commoditized carrier. We offer free drinks, free alcohol, free food, free bags. It's very much a bundled product. So we don't need the platforms to be able to do that ancillary selling for us. We just need flexibility about what channels and what partners we want to put that product out there with, and that's what we're struggling with most at the moment.
Okay, well, we're coming up. We've got a couple minutes left, and Dan, we have a question for you, so why don't we have you answer that, and then we'll do a wrap-up.
Sure.
It says, you say consumer behaviors are changing. What changes are you seeing in a minute or less?
Yeah, exactly.
Because we could be here all afternoon.
Yeah. So I'll answer this slightly differently in just saying that the speed of which consumer behavior is changing is becoming more rapid. And so this is where, in terms of changing our business, we have to be much more nimble than ever before. So customers' habits changing is important for travel preferences in terms of the product and the destination. Those are two things that are critical to our success, and the destination and what we're promoting, because all of a sudden a major event occurs and people shift. It's not that they don't want to travel, they're just instantly looking to go somewhere else. You know, Zika breaks out and all of a sudden people want to go to the Northern Hemisphere, they want to go to islands, they want to go to Ireland, they want to go to Japan. So various events that unfold in the world just requires an ability to adjust very rapidly. But in terms of where customer behavior is changing most significantly is where they are spending their time. And obviously, by and large, it's not in the print world. And it's trying to make sure that as you're staying very focused on the digital channels, because that's changing rapidly as well. And some of the channels that worked for us before, the distribution channels that worked online before, are no longer as effective because people are moving, and the hive moves to a new platform. And we need to make sure that we continue to ensure that we're tracking it and making the same adjustments, and not assuming that what has worked for last year and the year before. We put a digital playbook together internally for all of our business units, and that's based on this upcoming season, based on everything we've learned. So we're not just relying on what's worked in the past. We're always trying to figure out where it's moving to.
So let's start to wrap up. Nicola, 10 words or less. What's your words of wisdom for the audience in terms of successful partnerships?
Well, my suggestion, let's say, is to focus on whatever you think can bring value for both parts. This is key. Partnership, in my opinion, should be not something related to a situation in which you win and the partner is not winning, or the opposite. Successful partnership have always to be let's say, have to take advantage for both parties. Yeah.
So win-win for both parties.
Yeah.
Antony, 10 words or less.
Aligned strategy and good people. That's
interesting. Good people. Okay.
That's what we look for. Good people.
You want to do business with nice people. Okay.
Yeah.
Dan.
All right, so 3, land and expand. I think it's the most important way in our modern times to be able to really get a relationship established and make it thrive over the long term. Speed, the expediency of finding a way forward with a partner for both benefit, and then trust. And that trust element is just crucial.
Great, well, thank you all three. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in giving a big round of applause to Dan, Nicola, and Antony.